Hello, I'm Tamsin Bellaby. Thank you so much for joining me. This is my first time presenting at an educational event, so I'm a little nervous, but I'm really grateful for you joining me. Thank you. I am an art teacher, and I have been for 3 years. I teach Year 7 right up to A-level. And I'm a career change teacher. I had a career in the design industry before I became a teacher. I'm also an A-level examiner for OCR, and I'm a pastoral leader as well. So today I'm going to talk to you about my question, which is, which comes first, creativity or knowledge? So I advocate that to be creative, you have to have a wealth of embedded knowledge. Creativity is a result of knowledge. And put simply, being creative is about breaking rules. It's about knowing the rules that exist within a subject area. So for my experience, it's art. And knowing how to operate successfully within those rules, but then taking that deep knowledge and understanding how you can then break those rules cleverly to be creative. So, as I said, I advocate that knowledge has to come first for our students then to be successfully creative. So I could give you an analogy that if we asked a student to express themselves through an English essay, for example, they would need, for them to creatively express themselves in writing, they would need to have a knowledge of vocabulary, both technical and tier 2. They'd need to understand sentence structure, handwriting. They'd need to know have quite a wealth of knowledge of the subject and also the concepts that they're expected to explore in that essay. They'd need to know punctuation and SPAG. You know, the list is endless. And I think we can all agree that those students couldn't possibly creatively express themselves without having all of that knowledge. I believe that it's very similar when you are teaching art. You have to teach them the basics, the core knowledge, that really, really deep understanding, and they have to have that knowledge embedded before they can then break those rules to then express creativity. So I'm going to talk to you today, not from a position of me being an expert, but I'm going to talk to you about what I've done and what my department has done and what we have found has been successful, and certainly some things that haven't been successful. So we'll explore those too. And some of the things that I keep coming up against, or sort of, experiencing are sort of barriers and myths that people believe about art. So the first one that I sort of experience is that art is this creative, sort of ethereal, floaty subject that actually it's really difficult to nail down why something's successful. So I believe that that's a myth, and actually that's something that I would like to debunk. The second barrier or myth that I come across is that some people are, believed to be naturally gifted, and others just can't. Art's just not their thing. Now, whilst I will absolutely agree that different students have different starting points, I do not believe that anybody is naturally gifted in a creative subject. Often, almost always, if you unpick a student that is seen as being really, really gifted, you will see hours and hours and hours and hours of very deliberate practice, usually because they're heavily interested in what it is that they're being successful in. So it's not an accident, it's not luck, they're not naturally gifted at all, they're highly practiced. The third sort of myth that I come across is that art is seen as this feminine subject for girls. And actually the evidence says that it is very much seen like that, our last cohort of in our exam this year, only 33% of those entrants were boys. And they talk about it quite heavily, Pinkett and Roberts in Boys Don't Try, and sort of, why is this? And I think boys are really prone to peer pressure. So with the introduction of the EBacc and the sort of raising of status in the EBacc subjects, what we're seeing is that students have limited choice on their options and the subjects that they can then take. And I wonder then if that peer pressure from the boys, they then experience that at a sort of increased rate, and then we're getting even less boys. It has always been a historical problem, but it does actually, believe it or not, seem to be getting worse. We seem to be having fewer and fewer boys. And the last myth that I come across, and this is sort of my core focus for today, is the fact that some people believe that creativity is stifled by teaching knowledge explicitly in art, and also by teaching through direct instruction. So these are the things that, these four areas are things that I don't believe. I don't believe that they're true. But what I do believe is that art is an academic discipline. I believe that everyone can get better at art, and I also believe that everyone can access this subject. And I believe that with knowledge, creativity will blossom, but I don't believe creativity will blossom without that foundation of knowledge. So I have to sort of give a disclaimer before I go any further. One of the things that I find is key to the success within my classroom and within the art department that I work for is the super high expectations of behaviour. Now, my disclaimer is that I work in such an amazing academy that have this amazing focus, this driven focus on providing the culture and the climate for the students to thrive in. So behaviour is a really, it's one of our top priorities. And I work with an SLT team who see it as their responsibility. Behaviour is the SLT's responsibility, and therefore as a classroom teacher, I just teach. I am just focused on teaching. I have no split attention worrying about people talking or, misbehaving. I am there to teach. So that's my disclaimer. It doesn't mean that if you work in an academy that doesn't have that support, it doesn't mean that you can't achieve the climate that I'm going to describe. I just recognise that it might be a little bit more challenging without the support of the rest of the academy behind you. So the first thing, if you were to enter my art classroom, you would notice is that my desks are in rows. And this is because I want to be able to see every one of my students' faces. I want them to be able to see me at all times, and I also want them to be able to see the board. And as I go through my presentation a little bit later, you'll be able to see how important the board and the visualizer is to my practice. So the second thing that I insist upon is silence as standard. And I know that there are some difference in opinion in education. I'm completely unapologetic that I expect silence in my classroom, and it's as standard. It's the expected state that we learn in, and it's not social time. You're there to learn. So silence is standard, and the reason is that allows really high quality direct instruction from me and modelling, and also I get the students' full attention. And they get my full attention as well, which is super important. So no split attention from staff or students. The third thing that I really focus my attention on, particularly in September, but also revisiting after long holidays, are my routines. So I literally, practice makes perfect, and I invest a huge amount of time with my students, again, particularly in September, to drill really efficient routines for getting into the classroom, getting tidied up, handy books out. As a practical subject, you can imagine we have huge amounts of equipment out of the desk at any one time. And, a frustration that I'm sure all art teachers will share with me, or many will, is that for Key Stage 3, I only see my students for 60 minutes a week. So every second of that hour is precious. So I invest time in routines that are efficient and save time. And I know that feels really counterintuitive, doesn't it? I invest time in making people do things quickly so that I gain time back, but it does reap the benefits. It is worth doing. And the fourth thing that I do to establish this climate of learning within my classroom is we have this culture of respect. And again, it is academy-wide. So I am very lucky that it's not just me battling alone in my own little cocoon of my classroom. It is a culture for respect. And in our academy, we're all, it's something that we all say quite regularly actually, is that your teacher's words are gold dust. And I think it was Barry Smith that said it first at Great Yarmouth, but it really is true. Students should be hanging on your every word. You are the expert in the room. You have a wealth of education and experience in your subject. Students are expected to be sort of respectful and listening to you at all times. So I've just sort of outlined how important sort of behaviour and attitude and culture and climate are in my classroom, and I'm aware that I'm lucky enough that it's sort of academy-wide as well. But I believe that you could still establish this in a classroom if you don't have the support of the wider academy. So I'm going to speak to you now about my teaching philosophy. And I'm going to start by just sharing the praise that I have for my head of department. I'm so lucky. We're a really small department. It's only 2 of us. And my head of department is she's just really amazing, actually. It's a really sort of collegiate atmosphere. We do all of our planning collaboratively, all of it. We share all our resources, so as a result our workload is hugely decreased. And we share ideas, we talk to each other, we're very honest about each other, and our practice is improving by observing each other. So I am really lucky that I have this amazing head of department, and I'm very grateful for her allowing me to sort of come and share with you what we do, but also then sort of put our department out for scrutiny and comment. So thank you. I'm very grateful to have such a great head of department. So when I speak about all of this, actually we're a team. We do this together. So educational philosophy. My educational philosophy, I've been lucky enough in the 3 years of being a teacher that I've had lots of opportunities to visit other schools and see other departments, blazing the trail, really, doing things differently, and lots of wider reading as well. I'm a really keen sort of CPD reader. So my philosophy is based on the fact that art is an academically rigorous subject and should be delivered as such. And we have really, really high expectations, and we are really rigorous with the subjects and the content that we deliver. And I'll talk about that in a little while. But all of our subjects and all of our schemes and our curriculum that goes across, we really focus on these core principles, and we really don't shy away from those really challenging principles in art. So in year 7 we will teach line, tone, form, mark making, perspective, colour theory. We don't shy away from those things. We don't sort of save those until you're in GCSE. Actually, you're on an apprenticeship in year 7 to becoming an artist, essentially. And these are the things that we believe you need to have, and you need to really, really deeply understand these core principles. So I know that some of these principles can be seen as the boring stuff, the sort of boring, dull, observational drawing, tone, all of these kinds of things. But actually, we believe in our department that to achieve mastery of you have to understand the essentials and the foundations, and the really important stuff that you need to do, you have to do more of it. You have to do it really, really frequently to get it to be to the highest of standards. And we again have a really big focus on the fact that drawing, it's the foundation of all successful artistic endeavours, isn't it, really? If you can't draw, you're unlikely to be able to sort of sculpt or print make or paint, and it really is that understanding of form. And it's the simplest expression of that. So we have a heavy focus on drawing, and we teach that, as I'm going to talk about in a little while, about how we teach that, but we teach that through direct instruction. And we take any guesswork out of it. There is no guesswork. So as a result of really heavily focusing on these core principles, we feel that we have these really great benefits that come from them. So whereas you might think, oh God, curriculum that's really focused on sort of observational drawing, line and tone, and form, and all these very sort of heavy principles that are within the art world, actually what we find is we feel like the students get this feeling of success, and as we know, success breeds motivation, and it goes on this sort of spiral, and because the students, we've taken the guesswork out, often students feel very successful, feel like they've done a really good job because we've guided them really closely through the process, and what we find then is that they actually really enjoy drawing. We've had the highest uptake this year in our GCSE options, which, bearing in mind EBacc is a big focus, actually we've got, we're now in a small school, we've got 3 Year 11 classes, which is the first time since I've been there, and the subject has raised its profile within the academy. So it's, art now is really seen as a rigorous subject. It's not a DOS subject that you take. Certainly that's what it was seen when I was at school. It's not a DOS subject, it's really rigorous and it's really challenging. And each year our results are improving and getting better and better and better, and we're really proud of our art results within our academy. Something that we're working on, and we've started to make connections, but we want to build upon this, is we're making connections now across the curriculum. So we're starting to look at connecting ideas in religion and history, English literature and geography, and making those sort of natural connections. So as our curriculum moves through, we are trying really hard, and certainly next year we hope to build on this success. We're trying really hard to know what they're studying in English at that point. What are they studying in the humanities at that point? What connections can we make? How can we plan our curriculum to take the knowledge that they've gained at that point from English and from history, and let's tie it all together and really, really make sure that that student has this cultural, this cultural capital experience that helps them to understand that actually art is a cultural pillar. It is a cultural pillar, and if we really believe in equity and ensuring that the very disadvantaged cohort that we teach at the academy have that wider exposure, and that they understand how art fits in with literature and history and religion. So we're working really hard on that, and I think we've begun to make some steps in the right direction with that, but I think we have more to do, and we have plans in the future to sort of build on that one. So my final point about this is that we also teach through historical and biographical contexts. So we like to link. So the links that we make across the curriculum are often expressed through story. And we know from research that the brain favours story. So we use historical stories, religious connections to artists, and also sort of fiction and plays, and we weave a hinterland of knowledge around the subject that we are teaching within art, and we find that often really captivates the students, but equally it draws in those other threads of knowledge that the students might have, perhaps from English literature or from history and from RE, and it weaves that knowledge together. You often see students as you're delivering, this anecdote of sort of historical relevance, you can see them go, oh my god, I knew that because we talked about that in, and it's those connections, and that's when we feel that that's really, really powerful and really strong. So now I'd like to talk to you about how our teaching philosophy in art sort of comes into play, and what it looks like in reality. So I'm going to describe to you a typical lesson, typical sort of year 9 lesson, and I'm going to describe to you step by step how I deliver direct instruction and what that looks like in practice. So I greet all of my students at the door. Usually with an enormous smile on my face because I'm so pleased to see them, and they have an arrival activity. They're welcomed into the classroom one by one in silence. They go over the threshold of my door, it's in silence, and there's an arrival activity on the board, and that arrival activity requires absolutely no instruction. There's no questions to be asked. There's equipment they know where to get. There is no reason for them to do anything other than pen to paper at that point. And what I find then is that it's a really purposeful, meaningful start. Again, going back to that, every moment is precious in our lessons. We then, once they've had an opportunity to go through those, that will usually consist of sort of recall. In fact, it will always consist of recall and recap of prior knowledge, and it might be from last year, it might be from last term, last week, last lesson, and the links then connect to the lesson ahead. Okay, so it's always connecting that prior knowledge, but also using that retrieval practice constantly to make sure that they don't forget, interrupt that forgetting. Okay, so the final part of the arrival activity is usually open-ended, and it's usually some kind of practical step. So it might be drawing warm-up, it might be sort of loosening up your hand ready for shading, it might be practicing drawing your ellipses. And there is a very deliberate idea behind that, and that is because the students that are a bit quicker and a bit faster at retrieving that knowledge have an open-ended activity, and therefore there's never any period of time where they've got nothing to do. And it gives the other students that perhaps are a little bit slower retrieving that information get a little bit longer just to sort of work on that. Then we go through questioning, and I use cold calling. And I bounce questions around the classroom. I'm usually building and sort of linking, making connections. And the questioning part for me is, first of all, most enjoyable part of my practice, but also really important that students are held to account. There's no hiding in the classroom. Any student could be asked at any point. Certainly it's cold calling. And I certainly feel, looking around, that most students are sort of, having a think like, I've got the answer ready if she asks me. Oh my God, there's no relaxing. Now, something else that is certainly an artifact of the culture in my classroom and in our art department is really sky-high expectations of vocabulary, okay, and articulating full sentences. So the vocabulary expectation is really high. I've got year 7s that speak like artists, and certainly when we have visitors in, it's a comment that is often made, wow, the scholarly language that these students are using is really impressive. But that really is sort of the surface of it. For me, if they're using that kind of vocabulary and they're using it correctly and they understand, actually it signals far deeper learning. So I'm always really proud of them using the subject vocabulary, and we insist upon it, and we reward for it too. But it is something that we insist upon. So then, once we've sort of clarified any misconceptions, gone through some questioning and sort of recapped any knowledge, we then move on to our direct instruction. Now, in our academy, we have an expectation that if a teacher is talking, the students have their hands resting visibly on the desk, and they're not allowed to have their pen in their hands. So there's no sort of fiddling or tapping or anything like that. Now, this is just so fantastic in art, because what I will then do is I will model what we're going to be doing that day, or the activity or the drawing that we're undertaking. So I will always begin with what a good one looks like, so a waggle, and then rather than just showing them, this is what I expect you to do, off you go, work it out, that never happens. That never happens. There is always a step-by-step instruction of how to recreate it. There is no guesswork. There's no discovery learning. It is absolutely modelled to them with clear instructions. And this, for me, came from when I watched the Michaela podcast about the way that they teach art in their school, and obviously we've seen the results that they have gained across the board, absolutely astronomically high, just so impressive. So we make absolutely no apologies for sort of magpieing that idea that the direct instruction, there's no guesswork of how a student is to achieve what they're expected to do. So we model the process on the visualizers with students with no pens in their hands. They're not trying to do it at the same time. There's no split attention. They are watching what I'm doing. And actually what I'll do then is I'll narrate my thoughts. So I'll sort of, speak aloud about my cognitive choices that I'm making. And sometimes I get it wrong. Sometimes when I'm drawing on the visualizer, if I'm drawing from observation, I might get it wrong and I've got to rub it out, or I've got to redraft it. And that's so powerful. That's so important that students see that even the expert in the room gets it wrong, and it's no biggie. Rub it out. You know, it's no big deal. Sometimes I deliberately get it wrong, mainly because if I've got a really high percentage of students that I look at and I think, oh my God, you know, when you've got those particular students that are sort of so driven about perfectionism and they just want to screw up all their work and nothing's ever good enough, I will deliberately get things wrong sometimes to model the process of accepting when things don't go to plan, and what you do and how you deal with that, and that's perfectly acceptable. And I found quite a lot of success with that. So we go through the process of the I do, we do, you do, and then we repeat. And then the students at that point get the opportunity to go off independently. Okay, so I usually chunk the learning. So, okay, right now you do it, and they'll do that stage that I've just modelled. And I will circle the room at that point, and I'm usually looking for trends. I'm looking for trends of misconception, okay? And I'll give immediate personal feedback to students then. But then what I'll do is I'll choose some students' work, and I'll take it back to the front, put it under the visualizer, and I'll use this to praise it and also to critique it. And really, there's no point in me supporting one student at their desk. Okay, remember, they're working silently. You know, one student benefiting from my feedback, for me, is it's not efficient. Actually, what I can do is take their work and I can take it up to the visualizer and I can critique it. And, you know, because I've been around and I've identified that a few students have made this mistake, and I correct it under the visualizer. Now, this could sound quite stressful, couldn't it, for students? Like, oh my God, Miss is going to stick my work up on the board and she's going to tell everybody that I've done it wrong and then she's going to correct it. Well, potentially, yes, that could be a bit scary. However, we worked really, really hard on the climate and the culture and the, you know, just the acceptance of making mistakes in art. As I said, sometimes I get it wrong and I have to rub things out. So we have this really, really supportive and warm environment. Everybody gets it wrong. Everybody's held to account. You know, and your work could be up there at any time. And I'm really, really generous with praise. I'm very specific with praise as well, so it feels genuine. It is genuine. And actually, as a school, we favour immediate feedback and whole class marking. So it's something they're quite used to, actually, within the academy. So I'm going to speak to you really briefly about how we assess in our department. Briefly. So we produce benchmarking activities, particularly important in year 7, because as we know, the SATs results that come in, you know, do not sort of usually connect with whether they're any good at a creative subject. So we usually create our own sort of data, and we do this through benchmarking activities, usually drawing from observation, and then we use comparative judgment across the whole year group and we put them into rank order. Okay, so we then feed back to the students promptly as possible with really specific feedback on what they need to work on. They would then do the exact same activity at the end of that year, and there's a direct connection. We often use those pieces of work in parents' evenings as well to feedback, and we usually have some kind of conversation with that student where they've got their first piece of work and their second piece of work in front of them. And usually there's a visible difference in how much knowledge they've gained over the year, and then therefore they've then put that into practice into their observational drawing. So it's really clear to the student. It's a really powerful exercise. It's really clear to the student that they can see the progress that they have made. So the thing I'm going to talk to you now, the last section of my talk, is going to be talking to you about the areas of development that you know my classroom practice requires. So something that I'm really working on, and I have been working on for the last year, but I'm certainly going to continue working on, is moving my GCSE students from sort of heavily scaffolded support to independence. So I'm always looking for the best way, and often, you know, some students, it just naturally happens. They just progress into this very independent because they feel so confident and so secure in their base knowledge. And other students, it's a little bit more of a journey. So it's something that I'm working on. So please do feel free to DM me and sort of add comments if you've got any particular tips or success that you experience, you know, taking those students that have had heavily scaffolded support from you and then sort of allowing them to fly into their independence. Something else that I'm working on is, or I, feel that this is always a journey, is getting parents on board, making sure that parents support the art department. And we do this by, we loan a lot of equipment out, and we just trust students that they will bring it back, and they usually do. They're really good. And we're really proactive with our communication home as well. And I think this probably comes from my sort of pastoral role as well, that I'm really keen to get in there quick with my communication. So I will do postcards home, I will do positive emails home regularly, and I really try to get that ratio of 4 positive communications to 1 negative. And if you've got some positive communication in the bag with the parents, little Jimmy did such an amazing drawing today, and I'm so proud of him, and he worked so hard and his concentration was so good, thank you so much, but by email, that one time that I then have got to make that call to say he's not done his homework, again, I'm really unhappy, I find then it can be really, really proactive. So getting parents on board is really important and really key to the department. So something else that we've worked really hard on is sort of getting students at Key Stage 4 to be engaged, even when the teacher is not looking, so to speak. Because of course, at year 10 and year 11, they should all be working on independent projects. And it's so hard to know where everybody is at all times. So actually what we found is this culture of super high expectations, silence as standard, working really, really hard and maximising every second in your lesson has actually resulted now in our Key Stage 4 doing the right thing even when we're not looking. So if your time is taken up and you're demonstrating a new technique with a couple of students at the other end of the room, what I find is now the culture is really paying off. It's really paying off because I look across and they're still working really hard, even if I don't directly have eyes on them. So something that I've mentioned before is that we're still working on really connecting up that curriculum, and it's something that we really want to focus on, making sure that we are building in those connections with other subjects so that we can enrich the lives and build that cultural capital throughout the whole of their education, and art to be part of that. And the last thing that we're really focusing on this year is building our knowledge organisers. So our knowledge organisers at the moment are an integral part to our curriculum, to our art curriculum. And at the moment they feel a little bit like sort of vocabulary or a concept, almost like a list of things to learn. Well, my head of department and I are completely in awe of OLLICAV, and we would just love to work on producing a sort of graphic organiser that works. Perhaps we were thinking about something perhaps like a timeline that involved, how there's sort of social context and key movements and biography and culture, how that all comes into play, and illustrating that in a sort of OLLICAV style knowledge organiser with really student-friendly language. So if anybody has been successful in doing that, I would absolutely love to see it. Please can you DM me on Twitter and send me any successes that you've achieved there. So that's me coming to the end of my talk. I'm really grateful for you listening to me. Please join in a conversation. I'm really, really open to sort of comments and scrutiny. Please be kind. That's my first presentation. So I'm on Twitter at Tamsin Bellaby. And as I said, I'm not an expert. This is just what has worked for me. And it's taken a lot of time. I've made lots and lots of mistakes. And there's been a sort of period of struggle to achieve where we're at now, which is an upward trajectory of sort of really doing well within our subject. However, I'm committed to the fact that I know it's going to take more time. It's going to take more mistakes and more struggle, and that's the joy. That's the joy of being a teacher, isn't it? The task is never done. So thank you so much again to my lovely head of department, who's allowed me to expose our working practice to you lovely people. And I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you very much.